Hi, and welcome to another Friday live edition of the recording of the Engineers HVAC Podcast here on LinkedIn. And I'm Tony Mormino, the host for the podcast. And we've been doing these, this is the second week we've done a breaking news kind of segment. Had a lot of fun. So today we're going to do the same thing and we're going to record this podcast. So if you're watching this on LinkedIn, have any comments you want to add to the discussion, that would be great, or any questions, I'm glad to answer them if I can. And if you're listening to this on our podcast on a later date, thank you so much for listening and joining us. So what we're going to talk about today is the AHR Expo, a few tips on that. We'll also talk about the A2L refrigerant transition. I should say the transition from high GWP to low GWP refrigerants. There's still a lot of confusion out there. I just had a discussion with Paul in our Maryland office about the next part of the story of the news we're going to talk about, which is the sell-through proposal from the EPA, which has recently changed, which has caused a little bit of confusion. So we'll talk about that. And then I'll talk about some industry trends to look for in HVAC in 2024. So I hope that our audio and video is coming through on this live stream. And thanks again for joining us. So just a reminder, the AHR Expo is on January 22nd through the 24th. I am super excited to go to that. I can't wait to see. It's so funny. I've developed so many relationships online, especially on here on LinkedIn, and people I've never met before, I consider them friends. So I'm super excited to actually meet them in person. That will be really cool. And it's amazing with all this technology today, how we can really get close to each other and develop relationships when we haven't even met in person before. So I'm super excited about that. So that is January 22nd through the 24th. If you haven't registered, it's time. It's time to register, and registration's free. If you've never been to the expo, it's pretty cool. I really like going because it gives me a chance to see everybody. We're going to bring the video camera and take some booth videos and booth interviews, record a bunch of podcasts, and we're going to be live streaming from the AHR show as well. So every booth we're at, we're going to do what we're doing here. And part of the reason I've been live streaming a lot lately is to kind of test out this app from our phone. So if you want to see the AHR show, you don't want to have to deal with the 5 degrees and the snow, then please join us. Thanks for the thumbs up on the sound, Thomas. I appreciate it. I'm monitoring the chat here. If anybody has any comments or questions, let me know. So A2L phase down. Let's talk about that a little bit. Still a little bit of confusion in the industry, and I totally am in that boat too. I'm constantly reaching out to people to try and understand what's going on. I think we have a pretty decent handle to the situation. And for those who don't know, so here's what's going on. So the EPA issued a final rule that we are transitioning from high GWP refrigerants to low GWP refrigerants. Okay, so it's not, just a reminder, it's not a 410A phase out per se. It's a high GWP to low GWP. So when I started in the industry, ozone depletion was the big thing in the news and the environment. Now it's global warming potential. That's what GWP stands for. And anything over 700 is going to get phased out in our industry in terms of, the GWP of the refrigerant. So we're replacing 410A, which has a GWP of, let me look here. I've got my cheat sheet. I think it's 2000. So 2000 on 410A, that's getting replaced. There's basically two viable alternate refrigerants for R410A. One is R454B and one is R32, which both have a GWP lower than 700. So we're transitioning to these refrigerants. Now, this would not be that big of a deal other than they're what's classified as A2L refrigerants. Okay, if you've heard A2L refrigerants, I'll talk about what that means in a minute. But from the theoretical efficiency standpoint, the pressures, they're not very far off from 410A, which is good if you're an equipment manufacturer, so you don't have to redesign a lot of the components. Some of the components will have to be redesigned because it is a totally different refrigerant. So the classification of A2L, what that means is ASHRAE has a guideline 34, which classifies refrigerants based on toxicity and flammability, okay? And the A means it's non-toxic, okay? It's not that toxic. B means toxic. The 2 and the L refer to the flammability of the refrigerant itself. So like an A1 would be non-toxic. It would be a 1, non-flammable. A B1 would be toxic. It would be non-flammable. We used to have just a 1, 2, and 3 for the flammability, but the issue with 454B and R32 is it barely qualifies as flammable. So they started a new category and put an L on the end of it. So A2L means it's low flammability. Now, when I hear of flammability, I think of something like propane, right? You hit it, there's a big burst. The A2Ls are nothing like that. You can actually go to our YouTube channel. There's tons of videos we've done or we've referenced on there that other people have done. We haven't done any experiments ourselves. There's some great assets on there to see the actual flammability of it. It's extremely hard to light. It takes a lot of ignition. We go into all that, the ignition energy required, and the flame spread is very low, and the concentration has to be real high. So to light these is very difficult. From a safety standpoint, it doesn't seem like that big of a deal. Now, from a liability standpoint, you have to be super careful, right? Because you can't take an R410A machine and put an A2L refrigerant in it. I mean, you physically can do that, but you will avoid the UL, you will avoid the warranty. It can be dangerous, and you can cause major issues for yourself, for the occupants, and for your company. You probably could lose your license. So be super careful with that just going forward. Okay, so that's a little bit about the A2L. Don't be worried about the flammability aspect of it. It's not that big of a deal. Now, from the milestones of the phase down, just a reminder. So at the end of this year, 2024, new equipment cannot ship with a GWP refrigerant in our industry that's over 700. Okay, so that means 410A will not be in equipment starting January 1. Now that goes for commercial HVAC equipment, residential units, everything except for VRF. VRF gets another year and goes to January 1, 2026. Okay, so by the end of this year, no more commercial HVAC with 410A. It will have probably R32 or R454B in it. At the end of next year, January 1, 2026, VRF cannot ship with R410A. So it gets an extra year on the VRF. I don't know why that is, other than probably because VRF systems are pretty complex, and that change probably requires more engineering than a standard package unit. That's my guess. I'm not 100% sure. So those are the milestones. Those are the phase down dates. There's also phase down to the manufacturing of the refrigerant itself. This year started, in addition, I think last year was 10% reduction in manufacturing of the refrigerant. This year is another 30%. So that's 40% reduction. So you can see that we're already starting to get into kind of a scenario where we're still making a lot of the equipment with 410A, and we're running low on the supply side. So that's probably going to run into some issues with, cost and supply and all that, as it always does when we transfer these, change these refrigerants over. Now, I've been around since 97. I've been through a couple of these. It's not the end of the world. It's kind of a pain in the butt, but, we don't get a big vote on it. We just have to react to the rules set forth by the EPA and such. So if you're a little word of caution too, if you're engineering a job, if you're in the MEP business and you're engineering a job, laying out a job right now, be cognizant of the change coming up. And when you ask for selections, start thinking along the lines of, is this going to ship next year? Because the different refrigerants are going to be different machines, different UL ratings, different capacity, different selections. So it's going to be a different unit, right? So it's going to be a whole different deal. So if you have a 410A machine specified and it bids Q3 of this year, and then it goes out for submittals, you get submittals in the second quarter of next year for a package unit, it's going to be a different piece of equipment. How much different is it? Probably not too much, but you never know. Could change the electrical, et cetera. I don't know. But it will be a different machine. Just keep that in mind. If you have a job that's going to ship next year, you probably want to design it around one of the new refrigerants, one of the new low GWP refrigerants. So that's a little bit on the flammability. That's a little bit of a reminder on the milestones. And so the other thing I wanted to talk about is there's something called a sell-through period. So picture yourself as an HVAC rep or distributor, and you have a warehouse full of, rooftop units that, have 410A in them. Are you allowed to ship them after next year? What's the rules on that? So the EPA just extended the sell-through period, which was easing some concerns. So I'm going to read a little bit of this article by Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration News. I'll read a paragraph or two out of it, not much, and then I'll give you kind of my 2 cents. So it says here on October 24th, 2023, the EPA published its final rule regarding the transition to low GWP refrigerants in new refrigeration, air conditioning, and heat pump systems. The EPA initially faced industry backlash over the sell-through mandate of January 1, 2025. So originally when the EPA, just to back up here, so the final rule it's referencing here is what we already talked about, the milestones of manufacturing the refrigerant itself and when the equipment can ship. So that's what that's talking about when it's talking about the final rule. The sell-through is something different. That means like originally they said all the equipment you have that has 410A in it, all the package units, it cannot ship after January 1, 2025. But they extended that. So it goes on to say here, I'll just read a little more of this. The narrowly amended provision now allows one additional year into January 1, 2026, solely for the installation of new residential and light commercial air conditioning and heat pump systems using components manufactured and imported prior to January 1, 2025. Okay, so now you get an extra year basically. So if you got a warehouse full of 410A equipment, it does say commercial air conditioning. It says, light commercial air conditioning and heat pump systems and new residential. So in my world, light commercial means 25 up to 25 tons. Anything over 25 tons and over is commercial equipment. So I believe this only applies to under 25 ton equipment. So if you have a warehouse full of 10 ton packaged units with our 410A, instead of having to get rid of them by the end of this year, you get another year. So that's the extension on the sell-through. I've gone through this with a couple of people here at Insight, and we've talked to a couple of our vendors, and I think we have a good handle on that. So that's what that's talking about there. So if you have any questions on that, reach out to us and we'll talk about that. So another thing I wanted to cover real quick, and thank you for watching, by the way. These are a lot of fun. I like recording the podcast live, and it's been really cool. So another article came out discussing some HVAC trends to look for in 2024. And I'll read a few of these. I'm just going to give you a kind of a highlight and a summary of my take on a few of these. So there's 4 trends to look for in the HVAC industry in 2024. Whether you're an engineer, a mechanical engineer, or a mechanical contractor, or like us, you rep equipment, it's important to know what's trendy and what's happening and what people got their eyes on in the future. So for 2024, eco-friendly, energy efficient, and innovative are the demands shaping the HVAC industry in 2024. Technology has become an indispensable tool for HVAC contractors, driving a wave of transformation trends. And here's 4 trends to kind of look for in the coming year. So connectivity and predictive maintenance. So IoT connectivity. And did you know what IoT stood for? I did not know what it stood for, but I've looked it up. It says the Internet of Things. Is that correct? I don't know. That sounds good to me. IoT connectivity and smart devices are revolutionizing buildings. Real-time data on temperature, humidity, and airflow enables predictive maintenance, preventing issues before they occur. Now, in my experience, theoretically, that sounds great. In practice, it really is going to require us as an industry to focus more on commissioning and training at the level of, the technician, the people running the building. Because a lot of times my experience has been when you install equipment and you have an automation system and you go out there, the maintenance guys have tons of questions because either they've never been trained or the guy that trained left and the new guy's seeing all this stuff. He has no idea. What does it mean that the leaving air temperature's not being met and it's going above set point? What does that mean from a maintenance standpoint? What is this sensor over here doing? What are these funny looking things here that are reading airflow? What's that for? Why is this damper screwed shut? So, these things sound great on paper, but like in practicality, I think it'll take the industry a lot of work and a kind of a change in mindset to make sure we're giving the proper training to the building operators. Okay, so number 2 trend, green systems. I think this has been on the trend for quite some time, but it says the demand for eco-friendly solutions is skyrocketing. High efficiency HVAC systems like VRF, geothermal, and dual source heat pumps are gaining popularity. Green cooling techniques using natural refrigerants are rising, contributing to sustainable efforts. Now, I'm reading this, again, I'm summarizing this from a breaking news article I read the other day. I'm not sure I see a lot of this personally. I don't see a lot of, at least in our area, geothermal in the southeast. We do see some. We do see some of it, but it's not like some big sweeping thing. Dual source heat pumps, we see a lot of that. Again, being in the southeast, heat pumps are in our blood. We've been doing heat pumps for 1 billion years. I think some territories think heat pumps is like a new technology, but it's been around forever for us. And dual fuel is talking about, like, you may have a dual source heat pump. You may have a heat pump that has a gas burner in it or something. That'd be a dual source heat pump. Most of the heat pumps we see around here have electric strip heat as backup and for the defrost mode and such. Green cooling techniques using natural refrigerants. We don't see a lot of natural refrigerants in our business, at least in HVAC, maybe in refrigeration. That's starting to be something that's a little more popular. We don't see a whole lot around here. But trend number 3, ductless solutions. Updating older buildings with air conditioning is challenging, but ductless technology is often optimal. Ductless mini split systems offer flexibility for individual areas, making them a cost-effective retrofit option. 100% agree with that. I think ductless solutions, VRF, and I love historical renovations for ductless solutions, right? I mean, what could be better for that? Tons of applications for ductless units. I've got one we retrofitted my basement, and I got one that is a condensing unit outside, and it's got 3 indoor units, one for the living room and one for each of the kids, the boys' bedrooms down there. So we love that. We also have one in our garage, which my wife uses as her staging room and office for her business. So the 4th trend here, which I think is really important, customer experience. So beyond quality work and competitive prices, customer expectations now include a seamless experience. HVAC companies need to train the technicians on the latest technology, leveraging their online presence and utilizing technology tools for efficient service. I see that. I'm starting to see that as a heavy trend for sure. I think the HVAC industry in general, we've been kind of behind the curve on the technology side from a rep standpoint, from a manufacturing standpoint, from a contracting standpoint, and from an engineering standpoint. And I think we can up our game there for sure, to help improve the customer experience. And, a lot of what we do online, we do a ton of training online, which we enjoy doing. And using these tools has been a big help for us. We're huge. We're big on training. Like, we want to give back to the HVAC community when we can and do some training. So that was the news. That's the breaking news for today. Amazing. Now you could go into the weekend relaxed. So we talked about, the AHR show. We talked about the low GWP transition, which is currently going on. Again, reach out to us if you have any questions. We talked about EPA extending the sell-through period for 410A equipment, if you have some of that left over. And then we talked about some trends for 2024. So thank you so much for listening. If you're listening to this on our future podcast, we appreciate you. If you're listening to this live on LinkedIn here, we appreciate you as well. And thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks.